I have with me Pierre Beemans, a contributor to Just Ottawa. I encourage you to read his material in the site. There are great travel pieces on places like Bolivia and Uruguay, reviews, nice restaurant review, and various columns. So, Pierre, what did you want to talk about now?
Well, I was thinking, actually, Brian, that recalling a conversation that I had with my younger daughter when she was up visiting a few days ago, and she said, "What was it like growing up when you were a kid?" And I thought, wow, and it set me thinking. I know most of the readers of Just Ottawa are of similar background, of a certain generation, and probably like myself of European heritage, various permutations and combinations of British, French, German, Italian, Portuguese, whatever. Not to mention Irish and Scottish. I certainly wouldn't want to.
And Native Americans.
Well, I'm talking about most Canadians of our generation who are, I think, of the Just Ottawa circuit,
yeah,
are probably primarily of various kinds of European extraction. French Canadian mother, Belgian father. Grew up in a small town in northern Ontario, an almost idyllic little setting. A little place called New Liskeard at the head of Lake Temiskaming. And I was trying to describe for my daughter what it was like growing up in the 1940s and the very early 50s in this little town. And it really, think back, John. I don't know where you're, Brian. I don't know actually where you're. I am from Toronto. Well, that's all right too. Toronto's all right.
Can't choose it
Much
yourself.
better now than it was, but there you are. And it's hard to even remember. I said, to begin with, refrigerators. And I don't think anybody in town had a refrigerator. We had ice boxes. And in the winter, the crews would go out on the lake, and they would cut these great slabs of ice and load them onto horse-drawn sleighs, and they'd go into ice houses. In fact, my half-sister's husband's family were the ice and coal merchants. And coal in the wintertime, ice in the summer. The ice would be just smothered in sawdust, and it'd be left in these ice houses. And in the summertime, the truck or the horse-drawn cart would come around, and they would cut out a piece of ice that would fit into your ice box, into the top of it, and the cold air would sort of go down, and it would keep your butter sort of not hard, but keep it from melting in the summer months, brief as they were in Northern Ontario. And for a kid, there was nothing greater than when they'd take an ice pick, called because they use it to pick after ice, and they would break off a little chunk of ice, and you'd suck on that in a hot summer month. I mean, it was much better than all of these multi-flavored things that you get by paying $2.75 and digging into somebody's freezer in a convenience store. There were ice boxes, and there was no television. There was radio, to which you were glued to listen to these serials that went on and on and on, the Green Hornet and the Lone Ranger and various kinds of detective stories. And kids followed this with what the Canadian Idol has nothing to compare to sitting down and listening to the Green Hornet.
Yeah.
And you listened to the radio. And in the afternoons, of course, you knew that your older sister, your mother, was sitting at a certain point listening to soap operas, and I can't even remember the name of some of those. I'm sure that you can. Life Can Be Beautiful. There you are. That was one of them.
Well, Lux Radio Theatre?
Lux Radio Theatre. That was a bit highbrow. That was a bit highbrow.
Okay.
There was at 1:10 in the afternoon every day, the Happy Gang. Bert Niosi and all of these little sort of vignettes. I'm sure a lot of the little people who are watching this will remember those. And then cars there were cars around, but not that many. I think a car was something special in the particularly during, of course, the Second World War. You might have one, but you couldn't use it. And there was a tremendous sense of Britishness. I mean, everybody felt very Canadian, But at least in English-speaking Canada, which was our little town, right across the border, the Lake Temiskaming was Quebec, which was a world that was, was sort of like the Sudan or Egypt. I mean, it was really not terribly well known, nor well liked at the time. There was a real gulf between the two communities, and but there was a great sense of Britishness. People would get all sappy and misty-eyed over pictures in the newspaper of the king and the queen, and they would have crockery and ashtrays with sort of little royal this and royal that would be prized possessions in the living room or the dining room, and you don't see a lot of that these days.
No.
And no, not too many people collect little crockery photos of Prince Charles or
Princess Margaret.
Princess Margaret. Yeah.
My God.
So let alone their Prince Charles's wayward sons. And people stood up at the beginning of the movies. The movie started.
You
People
sang,
stood up, and the whole
God
theater
Save the
sang
King.
"God Save the King." None of this, "Oh Canada."
No,
Wish
no.
it was "God Save the King." And the last thing at night, when the movie's finished, well, not terribly late in history, everybody stood up and, to attention, and people removed their hats. Men wore hats in those days. Men wore hats. I mean, you wouldn't dream of, if you were normal, going out without having a hat on your head, a fedora, or a woman having some kind of hat, a bonnet or scarf. When, now I can't speak for Protestants, but when Catholics passed in front of a church, men would doff their hat. In fact, they would doff their hat when they passed a woman on the street as well. Don't see too much of that anymore.
No.
And so describing all of this to my daughter, she was watching me as if I was, like one of these Jules Verne's stories, Voyage to a Fantastic Planet or whatever. And it was a different world.